Hi there, I'm Erin, and welcome back to another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. We're in Versailles, Indiana, and we are at the former Versailles School. I'm here with Danny Jackson. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this wonderful building. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and you guys preserving the history and the background of this wonderful building. Like I said, my name's Danny Jackson. I attended this school for 12 years, so I have a lot of fond memories, like so many people in the community, about the experiences. You can almost hear the sights and the sounds of kids in here in the cafeteria. That's where we are. This is where we used to dine each day at about 11:30, between 11:30 and 12:30, and we'd come in here on shifts. But the history of this building is quite phenomenal, in my opinion, and the history of the town correlates with that. The town was founded in 1818, shortly after the state in 1816. And the state had mandated or passed a legislation, if you will, Aaron, about each township designating Section 16 as the section within that township to be set aside for public education. There are 92 counties in the state of Indiana and 900 plus townships, or at least there were at that time. And this is the original Section 16. This is Johnson Township. This is Ripley County, and this is Versailles, Indiana. And they started education here back in the 1850s, attempting to put a school. It didn't go too well because there weren't too many attendees, and the expense was exorbitant, so to speak, for the times. So most of the kids back during that period were homeschooled, or later on in the late 1800s, they evolved into a thing called subscription schools, where widows and people, especially ladies, of some degree of education would teach for a fee. And some of the families could afford to do that and some couldn't. So then in 1903, the first schoolhouse was built on this very structure that we're standing. And it was quite an awesome facility, and it was for a grand total of $12,000. And it had a belfry and a lobby and everything in it. I don't know whether it had an actual school bell, but I kind of envisioned it might have. So you call the kids in from recess or whatever. But during that period, that school operated until 1938, the one that was originally built here in 1903. And it was designed, Aaron, to house 300 students, which is pretty good at that time. And then in 1938, when this building was put in place, they shut down all the remote one-room schoolhouses that were in operation around the countryside. There was Tanglewood one-room school, Correct, Curran, different places, Elrod, different places. So they brought all the kids to town, and obviously you needed some transportation during that time, so thus the evolution of public buses, and didn't have buses, but carriages and things that would bring the kids in. All the towny kids, as we affectionately referred to them as, rode their bikes or walked or whatever. So anyway, in 1938, this building was constructed, awesome facility. Now keep in mind, from a perspective point of view, the Tyson Temple over here, which James Tyson was involved with, and he was a philanthropist and a benefactor for the town. You probably know the story about Tyson. But anyway, in 37, they built Tyson Temple for about $120,000. In 38, they built this building for $137,000, of which the $137,000, $70,000 was put forth or granted or donated, if you will, by Jim Tyson and his fund. He provided 70, Bonds did about 30 some, and a PWA grant, Public Works Administration grant, provided the rest. Now the kids during that period were housed in different little locations for their education, different buildings, different facilities, so they could construct this in 38. And in 39 was the first graduating class, so it was quite a festive time and a celebration for this town and such a wonderful, wonderful facility for the time. And it wouldn't have been possible, obviously, without James Tyson's generous donations. That happened in 38. There was no gymnasium attached to it. And Mr. Tyson was not big on athletics. I mean, he wasn't anti-athletic, but he was an academician by heart. He was born in 1856, and he traveled the world, and he was kind of self-educated, and he was an itinerant printer. But he was a big advocate of learning. Lifelong love of learning was kind of his modus operandi, if you will, and that's the way he conducted his life, and he kind of wanted everybody else to do the same. So then the library was built in 1941. The reason I mention these three buildings, you'll notice that the architecture, Aaron, is quite similar The quality and the style is very similar. The fascia brick is all glazed custom brick that you can't get anymore. And like we mentioned earlier when we were talking, the floors are marbleized mastic tile, which was kind of unique at the time. We're in the cafeteria, and speaking of the cafeteria, like I was saying before, this is where the people congregated for meals. Also, this is where the community had lots of activities. The actual junior-senior prom was conducted here prior to the Tyson gym being built in '51. The Lions Club met here, the town board met here for large meetings that involved the town. Different clubs met here, Boy Scouts met here. So there was a lot of activity in and out of this school, and of course the school was kind of the pride of the community as well, and the focal point of the community as it should have been. Then the school is 3 stories. I don't know whether you've seen that or not. And it's housed all 12 grades when I went to school here, up through 1966. At that time, they consolidated into the new school out on Benham Road, and then it became an elementary school and housed just up through the 6th grade. But during that period, Aaron, 1938 to 1966, when it was a full 12-grade high school, there was an assembly on the top floor. The high school was on the top floor, basically. The elementary was on the middle floor. This was the service floor, if you will, with the cafeteria, home ec, FAA, boiler room, things of this nature. You probably noticed these steam pipes here and things of this nature. It was fired by coal in a great big coal-fired boiler down in the furnace room.
Neat.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. And that's one of the places we used to get to go if you were good in class when you were young. You probably couldn't do this today, but the teacher would assign you the job of cleaning the erasers. And they had a thing down there as you put the erasers through, it took all the chalk out, and dust would fly everywhere. Now, you couldn't do that today because of the ocean and all that stuff, right? I mean, it wouldn't be allowed. So anyway, there were lots of activities in this room. And there was a story that about myself, I guess. There were no free lunches back then during that period. I can't remember anybody having a free lunch, so to speak. Now there's 67% of the kids out here get free lunches and free breakfasts. So times have changed, and I'm not saying one thing or another about that, but there was a lot of accountability and responsibility and values oriented into young kids when they were early. And one of my privileged jobs that I got to pay for my lunch was I got to wash out the milk bottles. We had these little small milk bottles about this high, provided by Dunbar and Boltman. And I'd stand outside this room and stack the racks in the hallway up with milk, and the kids would come by, and they'd pick out chocolate or vanilla or whatever they wanted. It had a little tinfoil top on it. They'd stick a straw down in there, and they'd go through their trays and get the food, come out, eat, communicate, chat, whatever the case may be. And then they'd bring their bottles back and put them back in the wire racks. Well, I'd take them in that little utility room out there and wash them out so they wouldn't be stinky or wouldn't.
And that's how you paid for your lunch.
I paid for my lunches. So
that is great.
Isn't that awesome? So I thought so too. Saved my mom 25 cents or a day or 18 cents or whatever it was, So anyway, it was kind of an interesting little side story that I remember very vividly. Wow. But in 1966, the school shut down from a high school perspective. And during that period, Aaron, of 38 to 66, there were about 800 graduates that came through this building. Also, before that, from 91 to 66, there were about 1,400 people that went through school. In the early years, it was mostly ladies, if you will, because a lot of the guys were on farms and stuff and working, and they weren't quite as academic oriented as maybe some of the girls or ladies were. But that kind of brings us to where we are. And in 1992, I was in Roswell, Georgia. I'd been there for about 15 or 20 years. And it was Sunday afternoon, and Aaron, something came into my mind about the school because they were going to be consolidating. So I thought to myself, I wonder what happened to that old school. And something kept drawing me and pulling me to that thought. So early that evening, I called Everett Thompson, one of the guys I used to go to church with who's on the school board. And I said, Everett, this is Danny Jackson. I hadn't talked to him for years and years and years. And I said, I wonder what happened to that old school down there, what's going to happen. He said, interesting you called. He said, they're auctioning it off and they're trying to get rid of it. And tomorrow night at the board meeting, they're going to sell it. And he said, so far they haven't been able to sell it very well and not getting any takers. And I said, well, what will happen if they don't sell it? He said, well, they'll probably tear it down and just leave the gymnasium and play basketball and stuff into the gymnasium until they build a new one out on Benham Road. And I said, well, who do I need to talk with about that? I might be interested. I really don't want it torn down. I'd like to keep it for perpetuity or forever if we can. And he said, well, it's probably going to be pretty expensive to maintain. I said, I understand. So he said, you might call the superintendent. I forget who it was at that time. So the next day I called him, and he faxed me some information. We weren't big on emails and texts and stuff back in 91 and 92, but he faxed me some information. So I called another guy here in town who's in the legal profession and asked him if he'd represent me that night. And he did, and I ended up buying the school. So,
wow. Okay.
I've gone to school here for 12 years and bought it, and I kept it for about 10 or 12 years. And then I ended up selling it to the historical group over here who put the senior apartments and stuff in. But at least it got preserved, it got protected, and I'm so happy it did because...
You saved it.
Well, I don't know about that. Somebody would have saved it because there's too many fond memories and things about the school.
Thanks again for watching another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. We're in Versailles, Indiana. We're at the former Versailles School. I want to thank Danny Jackson for everything that he's given us today.
Thank you.
And remember, travel slowly and stop often.
Bye.
Bye.